Welcome. We are at Intersoft. This is the last session for today at Intersoft. 90 minutes. Planned were 3 talks. Michael de Zan from Munich. I'm really excited. Sect or state religion. I mean, you bring the subject of church and religion vaguely into the discussion.
We will see.
Then we have Anke Nehrenberg from Commitment. And of course, I know you very well, and I'm really excited. I haven't seen you.
Are you
yet.
sure?
Yes.
All right.
I'm looking forward to that. And sadly, Gina Heuske has just told us an hour ago that due to an illness, she won't be able to give her talk. She would have been remote on Zoom. I have an idea of one of our guests, maybe that we pull him up to the stage later on to take part in the talk. Now, why did we actually choose this topic, thing or cult, in sustainability as a topic for a panel and put in 3 talks? Now we have 2 talks, but why? What was the idea behind it? Really, when we talked about it last summer and when we invented the idea of having a panel, we thought it's kind of really difficult to find things in sustainability, sustainability as something that concerns us all and keeps us thinking. How can we do steps into something that's an action, that changes something and not just talk about sustainability? So we'll see how it goes. We will have 2 short impulse talks. They won't be too short, I think like 25 minutes each. And then we will have plenty of time for a podium discussion afterwards, and we involve you as participants remotely and locally. So stay tuned. If you want to ask questions, you may do that as well by just opening up your microphone and saying something later on. Not during the talks, please, but afterwards, that'd be great. All right. And with this, from Munich, I'm really glad that you're here, Michael. This is the presenter key. I give it to you, and
Great,
have fun.
You.
I will, I know.
So, good evening, and thank you for your kind introduction. I'm really glad to be here on a Munich conference here in Hamburg, when I live in Munich. So, we will talk about culture in this evening, and my part has to do with that because I will talk about one, let's say, motor that co-creates culture, and that is ritual. And I'd like to do that in 2 steps. Firstly, I will give you a short introduction into rituals, talking about where do they come from and what are functional aspects of rituals, and also offer you basic structure of rituals that could help you identifying rituals in your working world and to analyze them. And let's take that as a kind of theoretical base to go the second step, and that is directly related to the title of my contribution to this panel, Sect or State Religion. And there I will consider this question and will ask, where are we in our agile environment? And in order to do that, I will describe the way from the early Christianity, from a sect to an obligatory state religion, and try to draw parallels from that to our agile working environment. And if that works, we can ask the question, can we learn something from this comparison? So, let's start with the first part, the introduction into rituals. The interesting thing is that there is no culture without rituals. And there is no area in our lives where we humans don't create rituals. Why is that? Where does this seemingly great affinity to shape our lives in and with rituals come from? Ronald Grimes, an US-American ritual researcher, gives here a first hint in his introduction to his ritual studies work, and he writes, "The roots of ritual are inescapably biological and natural. Since ritual is a rhythmic response to the patternings and events which precede and define us, We only understand the fruits of ritual by considering the change of seasons, the fluctuations of mood, and the periodicity of history. Ritualization is rooted in the rhythms which we are, the combined repetitiousness in indirection and playfulness characteristic of us as biological animals. And I like this statement very much because it reveals that creating and using rituals is an answer from us as biological beings to our environment. But why does that help us in our working world? Why is it worth to spend these 20-25 minutes on a software conference to talk about rituals? And here another, maybe better known scientist puts us on the right track, and this is Émile Durkheim. Maybe you know him, the French sociologist and ethnologist who taught as professor at the Bordeaux University at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century. And a great merit from Émile Durkheim was to introduce sociology as a scientific discipline. And Durkheim worked mostly on religious rituals, as you see here in one of his main titles, The Elementary Forms of Religious Life from 1912, where he studied Australian rituals. But Durkheim had always the social aspect in mind. So he asked, what effect do rituals have for a society? And here another US-American ritual researcher, Catherine Bells, summarizes the results of Durkheim in the following way. Durkheim reintroduces ritual as the means by which collective beliefs and ideals are simultaneously generated, experienced, and affirmed as real by the community. Hence, ritual is the means by which individual perception and behavior are socially appropriated or conditioned. What you see here is that rituals have an enormous performative power. They bring about and change something just by participating in rituals, and by doing that, you do exactly that. You affirm or appropriate or disappropriate and condition and discondition your beliefs and your ideals. And if rituals have this performative power, and if we in our working life perform on a regular basis rituals, then I guess it's more evident to spend some minutes to think about these rituals. As I said, ritual studies originally dealt a lot with religious rituals. The today's ritual studies have a much broader spectrum. They consider sports, politics, science, mass media, and so on. And of course, there are a lot of different rituals. You have social rituals like shaking hands as a sign for welcome. You have political rituals like an opening of a parliament, or the recent great ritual about the funeral for Queen Elizabeth II. And you have secular rituals like the opening, the bell ringing at a stock exchange, and our agile rituals. And the thing is that some of these rituals have nothing to do with each other, but the structure as ritual itself. And that leads me to the next one. I'd like to talk about functional aspects that apply to each and every ritual, and I'd like to explain that by another well-known example, a wedding ritual. So what are these functional aspects? As first point, rituals are communicative and interactive. And if you think about a wedding, you promise something within this ritual. You exchange rings. You talk and you give answers in this ritual. A second aspect is that each ritual is embedded in the context of cultural significance. If you wear a white dress as sign for festivity and a positive thing. Of course, you know that the color white is not in each culture a sign for festivity. A third aspect that applies to ritual is that, what you already heard, rituals are performative actions. And by this example, you enter a church as two singles and you leave that as a married couple. I guess you know that within this ritual something changed with your reality. And rituals establish group identity. And also here I have an example. Try out not to invite your parents or your best friends to your wedding, and look what that makes with the group identity of your family and your friends. And I guess then you know that participating has to do with identity. And the last and one of the most important aspects of ritual is that due to the structure of repetition, rituals reduce complexity, because you don't have to invent each and everything new when you do something. And imagine just a situation that you want to marry a person and you had to invent your own ritual from the beginning, to invent all the texts. That would be quite a challenge. I know that in the current days, couples are used to, let's say, create their own frame, but also these aspects are taken out of other rituals that already exist. So these are functional aspects that apply to all rituals, and that leads me to the next point, a basic structure for rituals. And also here I brought, I guess, a well-known example. I copied the chapter for the daily Scrum out of the Scrum Guide from 2020. So, one dimension of each ritual is that there is an action, a gesture, something you do, something that you can see. And the Scrum Guide talks also about that because it gives concrete instructions. You see about the duration, it takes 15 minutes. It talks about the participants, the developers, and the Scrum Guide talks also about the rhythm and the cadence. So the daily Scrum takes place each day at the same, working day at the same place. So these are rather concrete instructions. Each ritual consists also of another dimension, and that is an abstract one. Each action you do in a ritual is related to something that is not part of the action itself, but relies on or is related to another dimension, a concept, a thought, an idea, and a value. And also this you can see on this example of the daily Scrum. The Scrum Guide calls this the purpose. And the purpose of the daily Scrum is, of course, to inspect the progress toward the sprint goal, adapt the sprint backlog, adjusting the upcoming planned work. And here you see, literally, it is to reduce complexity. Now it will be no surprise when I explain that a ritual is exactly the synthesis of these both dimensions, of an abstract and a concrete dimension. And this, in this case, is the daily Scrum. That was the first step. Now let's go the second step and talk about sects and state religions. But before doing that, one thing is important for me to mention. When I now compare the situation of the early Christianity with our agile working world, that does not mean that I consider agility itself as a religion. That is no religion for me. My idea was the early Christianity and the church practice rituals. That makes the Christianity to ritual community. And we, in our working world, also perform rituals. So we are also a kind of ritual community. And if we both are ritual communities, maybe we can learn something from each other. And here we have, I guess, 2,900 years more experience. So let's talk about that. And I'd like to draw a kind of picture about the very beginnings of the Christian religion. And there you had, let's say, small, enthusiastic communities. And these communities were firstly a part of the Jewish religion, of course, and then broke away from that. So the first Christian cells, so to say, left the official temple services and the gatherings in the synagogues, and instead they gathered in their own houses and flats. And there they performed simple rituals, like breaking of bread, drinking of wine, and the water baptisms. And all these simple rituals already existed. They just took them and used them because they fit to their beliefs. And if we change a bit the perspective, from a Jewish perspective, these small enthusiastic communities were following a false prophet, and they were reinterpreting their own rituals in a wrong way. For instance, you know this Passover ritual in the Jewish religion, and the Christians took that and reinterpreted it as the Lord's Supper. And if we change again the perspective from a heath's perspective, so for the Romans, the Greeks, everyone outside the Jewish and the Greek and the Christian context, the Christians were just a little sect, a little Jewish sect. And they were doing nonsensical things. They were nursing the sick and visiting the prisoners. And more important, they were undermining the Roman state cult because the Christians did not want to sacrifice for the emperor. That was a political problem. But another aspect was that there were a lot of misunderstandings about these Christian rituals. And if you read the Gospel according to John, you find, for instance, this text, "I assure you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you do not have life in you. Those who eat my flesh and drink my blood have eternal life." And if you hear this sentence out of a context, of course it's clear that this led to the misunderstanding that Christian rituals have to do with cannibalism. So in the first centuries, for different reasons, there have been a lot of waves of persecutions for these small enthusiastic groups. Let's now try to bridge to our working environment. I could imagine that the beginnings of the agile software development had a kind of similar situation. Also there was a small number of leaving software developers who were trying something new because they made the experience that the current way of software development and software projects often failed. And they tried to establish new practices like Scrum or extreme programming. And of course, they started this sporadically in some companies at the beginning. And I, and maybe you also, could imagine that also there were a lot of misunderstandings regarding the terminology, the events, the procedures, and so on. And also, until now, they made the experience of being rejected by the proponents of the traditional way of software development. Let's come back to the Christian environment. There took place a considerable change of the situation for the Christians in the 4th century. Maybe you remember from your history lessons that in 312, the Roman Emperor Constantine the Great won the battle at the Milvian Bridge. And Constantine attributed this victory to the Christian religion. So subsequently, Christianity became an obligatory state religion in the Western and Eastern Roman Empire, and you could say that Christianity was scaled up. So instead of enthusiastic small congregations, Christianity became something that applied to all Romans. And for instance, the bishops were integrated in official structures of the state. The participation in the rituals itself became mandatory, and the elevation to that obligatory state religion led to a flattening of the participation in these rituals. And you can read that in the text of this time. For instance, the theologian St. Augustine complains about that the people go to the Christian rituals like going to the theater because they are curious. They just go to there to be entertained. And that was not the sense of these rituals. Let's try to bridge also here to our current situation. And sometimes I have the impression that we are quite at this point. Agility practically arrived in all large companies. And instead of individual cells, agility is rolled out to entire organizations. And often it is no more a choice to work in an agile environment, but mandatory by decision of the employers. And my point is that this, of course, will affect also our rituals by the level of engagement and maybe also by the creativity to find the right forms of actions that meet the intentions of our rituals. But don't get me wrong here. I don't want to say that this has to be the end of the world. For a Christian of the first centuries, I guess it was far better being part of a state religion, but ending as a human forge flanking the Via Appia in Rome. So what I just want to say is that if this is our situation, we should be aware that that could also happen to the participation and the realization of our rituals. So if I try a short summary for this short input, I'd say keep in mind, rituals are intentional actions performed repetitively. And be aware of the performative power. Each time you perform your ritual, you establish something. And within these rituals, something is affirmed or not affirmed. So in good and in worse, rituals do something with your community. And our challenge is to trying to find actions that expresses these intentions of this abstract level we saw before. And I should, if we learn something from a comparison, then that we should avoid the feeling of being forced to participate like being part of a state religion. And the challenge is, of course, to support this experience that it is an advantage for those who participate at our rituals. I formulated some questions on this background that could help you reflecting your own rituals. And I highlighted 3 ones, so you could ask your own rituals, for example, how easy would it be for an outsider to actively participate in your ritual? Or you could ask, and this is a solution-focused question, on a scale from 0 to 10, how convinced are the participants that the ritual helps them? When 0 is the coercion of a state religion, and 10 is the enthusiasm of a community of the first hour. And just here, as a third one, on a scale from 0 to 10, how much effort does it take to explain the meaning of the rituals to the participants when 0 means a lot of explanation is necessary and 10 means the ritual explain itself? So, that would be my start, my input. There are a lot of more questions, but you can read that afterwards. And I'd hand over to you and say thank you for your audience.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Michael.
you.
That is great. So I really wonder later on for the discussion what your opinion is, whether we're being taken over by the Roman Empire in agility or not. That was a good comparison. I suggest you just swap places with Anke.
So, all right, let's start over. To boldly go where no man has gone before. And I'm going to talk to you about culture and growth. I'll start with some definitions, share some observations, and might end with predictions. So, who am I? I'm Anke. These are some hashtags about myself, and I'm happy to get in touch with all of you on one of those social networks. For those who don't have time to follow me through the next 23 minutes, this is a short TLDR. The important takeaway from it is highlighted in red. So it's time to question and readjust basic assumptions on which organizations operate to develop a sustainable culture of growth. But first of all, let's start on a blank page with some definitions about the central terms of this talk, which are culture and growth. Or why culture of growth at all? There is this book by this title, Culture of Growth, and it mentions in it the Republic of Letters. Anyone heard of the Republic of Letters before? It was a long-distance community in Europe and the Americas in the 17th and 18th century, and they exchanged ideas and thoughts by writing letters, because they didn't have email or chats or whatever. And this exchange initiated technological and economic developments, which laid the foundations for modern economic growth. And in short, this was a radical change in beliefs, in values, and in preferences, or in short, a radical change of culture that laid the foundations for modern growth. So what is growth at all? Well, seems easy to define because you can measure it. When talking about organizations like companies, most of you work in companies, growth is usually measured and counted in money, in people, in market shares. Things that can be counted and measured easily. It also refers to immaterial things like intellectual property, social and mental maturity, or even wisdom. Organizational researchers came up with the term human capital so they can measure those immaterial things as well. And as organizations grow, almost all of them experience the Greiner curve. Maybe some of you know the Greiner curve. It's named after the organizational researcher Larry Greiner. All kinds of organizations, even families, NGOs, and most of all companies experience these curves. They go through different stages, each of them being just a temporary period of stability and stable growth. But growth always shakes the stability of an organization. So each stable period is followed by a crisis, when major change is needed if the company is to grow further. And that makes clear growth always, or the process of growing, always needs a sort of orientation. Growing always comes with instability, as we just learned, but as humans, and humans acting in social systems, we strive for equilibrium, for stability, for orientation. And one task of organizations or of organizing is to find answers to balance growth and making sense of it all. And this is where culture sweeps in. I don't know if any one of you recognizes this gentleman here. He just sadly passed away 2 or 3 weeks ago. It's Edward Schein. And he's one of the founders of organizational psychology and development. Maybe most of you are familiar with this one. This was developed by him, the iceberg model. And it basically states that culture, for the main part, is intangible, the part that lies below the surface. But it determines how we act, decide, and what organizations look like, the artifacts we see above the surface. So, culture. Defining culture is really hard. But I find this very simple definition on the top very handy. It's almost a quarter of a century old. There is a newer one, which rather refers to our feelings rather than what we can observe. I like both of them. And they do work for our talk tonight. There are also various cultural frameworks or models, organizations, and we always have to look at those paradigms that define culture. And this is the organizational framework defined by the so-called competing values, which you can see on the two axes, referring to the flexibility and the focus of the organization. As usual with models, they're neutral. There's no right or wrong in it. Each organization will develop a culture that fits their purpose, their mission, and their business. The framework of the competing values just states that these values do compete, but we often observe that organizations try to merge them because they find themselves in a world of contradictions, like we all do, do we? And this leads me to some observations. I started this talk by stating that radical changes in beliefs and values were the foundations for modern economy and growth. So what changes can we observe in recent years? I just pick some. For once, there's a demographic shift in connection with shortage of skilled workers. That makes it difficult for companies to maintain workforce and to ensure knowledge transfer. This goes along with ongoing digitalization efforts. I marked in red where we find Germany in an international comparison, by the way. Digitalization sometimes is framed as a mitigation strategy for labor shortage and to keep up with market changes or changing market demands. And to pick one more, organizations need to face diversity in their own workforce, in customers, and in markets. All of this, plus many more challenges, resulted in the adoption of the term VUCA for volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, to describe the world we all and all organizations experience. In a way, this is peak postmodernism, the end of the great narratives. The end of the great narratives our economic and organizational and culture of growth was founded on. Or put differently, we are having a hard time to describe a new major consensus narrative and to make sense of it all. Anyhow, organizations need to adapt to this and have a hard time to cope or even fail. So several studies come to the conclusion that the multitude of challenges results in shorter company lifetime expectancy because organizations simply fail to handle the multitude of challenges. We have numbers from the US and Germany here. And all of that was already before the pandemic. The pandemic has given organizations a push in their development somehow, reflecting on the way they work, how they think about leadership, how they interact, how they communicate, and the importance of their relationships. In short, to think about their culture. Now we are talking about hybrid work, for example. Here are recent figures from the last 2 years from the US and Germany. And during the pandemic, many people realized the importance of human relationships and the importance of other things in the world as well. In the US, for example, we are facing the phenomenon of the Great Resignation. The pandemic allowed workers to rethink their careers, their work conditions, their long-term life goals. In particular, in younger cohorts, we are seeking to gain a better work-life balance. And all of that was before the Zeitenwende. This term, as I think most of you know, was coined by Chancellor Olaf Scholz last year and was even word of the year 2021 or two, I believe. Yeah. Which makes VUCA obsolete. We're now talking about Barney. Brittle, anxious, nonlinear, incomprehensible. The age of chaos. That is actually the title of an article by Jaime Kashais. You can read it on Medium. I share all my slides and you'll find the links in it. And he's a fellow at the Institute for Future. So what a time to reflect on the culture of growth today, huh? In the Barney age. I thought I might end with some predictions. Well, that's not easy, but let's go. One is we need organizational frameworks for postmodernity. So how does the age of resilience or the age of chaos, as Kashais puts it, inform organizational culture? Well, we know that we need to recognize the underlying assumptions and values to understand what rules the everyday work, culture, and organization. So let's take a look at what we can already see about the assumptions and values that might shape tomorrow's organizational cultures. Remember this illustration? So we learned that modern economic growth depended on radical changes in culture. This might not be easy to read for you, but I'll zoom in a second to outline where we stand today. I really like this depiction of economic development because it covers various dimensions. So let's zoom just in on the outlook it gives for working cultures. Our current era of the information culture will transform into a culture of a smart society, it states, with a newly found focus on sustainability. This, after all, will need a more systemic view and a more systemic way of acting of organizations. I called this, we need an economic Copernican turn. We are not in the center of everything, we're just a part of it. But to be able to do this, to recognize this, and to translate it into actions and incorporate it in our cultures, we need to overcome modifications, in German that will be Kränkungen, that come when we have to abandon long believed truths. This is a challenge for each individual, and it's even more challenging for social systems and organizations being social systems. They are social systems defined by a common purpose. And success for organizations means they achieve their purpose, the purpose that brought them together and keeps them together. Some of you may have recognized I had a deep and intense conversation with ChatGPT on this, on culture. Yeah, that was really interesting. I recommend it to all of you. Try it. It's like talking to the wisdom of crowds on the internet. And ChatGPT and we came to the conclusion that systemic thinking and acting will help to grow a new understanding of culture and growth. And I highlighted a part I especially liked. Organizations understand that their success and growth are not isolated from the rest of the world. We're part of the system. Now, what does this mean for the culture of growth for the future? We will face, or we do already face, a development towards a new understanding of what success means. Which dimensions of growth will contribute to it and develop a new culture of growth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anke. Maybe you take a seat close.
I do.
And, then we would have the third talk now by Gina. Whoever has a chance to go and look up Gina Heuske on the internet, she is the open source maintainer of a 3D printing software called Octoprint, and it's just amazing. There's an interview in the IT Spectrum with her from November, and it's just amazing with what energy she actually goes into producing something, maybe that connects to your action, or the action thing that helps like 2 million people all over the world. I think 2 million is about the estimated share. She's not with us today, so Gina, if you hear us, if you're by some magic moment, we hope you get better. Really a pity that you haven't been here. We'd like to invite you again. But back to our panel. I mean, thing or cult. And we framed this also with the term sustainability. Now, I heard a talk by you, Michael, which was very much in the past and argued that we rely as humans, or that we benefit or profit from rituals, from things that we do regularly, if I translate it for what I understood, that give us safety and orientation, and that are also in a way, or that proposes a shortcut in terms we don't need to discuss all the things all the time new, but this is just the way we do it. And then on the other hand, Anke, you had, like, from what I got, more a gaze, a glimpse into the future, and if I got you correct, or parts of you, and you please do correct me, but you made, you kind of opted for that if we stay together or connected as people, and we kind of grow a culture of connectiveness, that might help us to overcome the insecurity that we have by all the changes that we currently face, and by your thought on organizations won't stay as they were, as we're used to them. So everything, we're in a big, massive change of changes. So connectivity. And I asked you whether you had questions for your talks. So if you don't raise your hand, I will ask the first question, but I wait for 3 seconds, and maybe one of you has a question to the other to start.
I do have.
Oh, that was quite fast.
I do have two. Maybe I put them both on the table and you choose which one to answer, or which one to answer first. So what first came to my mind is, was there any particular event or some single event that brought up the thought of the comparison of agility and church or sects? So do you remember one major event? That's the first question. And the second question is that, to my point of view, sometimes religion works like a virus. You implant it into people's brains and they are sort of aligned decentrally, and you don't have to worry because they all know what's right or wrong. Is there any comparison you could draw to agile methods or agile organizations?
I'd like to answer the first and easier question. And it was just talking with colleagues and a short discussion about rituals. And then I remembered my time during my studies. I worked at a chair for liturgy studies in Munich at the university, the theologian discipline who reflects the rituals of the church, of the Catholic Church. And then I read articles and said, I remember something. And I read this article and said, whoa, I have the feeling we are in that applies to our situation. And I had thoughts about that. That was the beginning of the idea to elaborate that. And that then it was really, really interesting to dive deeper into ritual studies and to compare different rituals and their aspects. Because I said that there are a lot of rituals and they don't have to do anything with each other, but it was also interesting to say, does our rituals tend to be more this rich kind of ritual, or that, for instance, magic or liturgy and so on? That was quite interesting. So that was the beginning. The second question is a bit more difficult, because, yes, there was something that built, let's say, the core of these communities. But in the first centuries, there were communication channels, but they were a bit independent. And the thing was just to accept that you can't align that totally. That is an idea of the 19th century. So the idea, of course, in Rome was always to say, we say how it works and everybody makes that. But if, as you can imagine, if one letter takes 1 year from Rome to Southern America, it's not easy to control the entire church. So over years, it was okay to have different cultures, also within in the church. But there was something above that. So I guess that's the thing, to accept that there are differences and to say we are in the same community and we accept being different. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, in a way.
But feel free to ask again.
Yeah, the idea was more like if I tell people what's right or wrong and why they are loaded with guilt and have to work hard to make up for it.
Technical guilt.
Then you know what's good or bad in life, and you don't need a central instance because people know by being a part of it what's right or wrong.
That's a crucial point. So from, let's say, the perspective of the administration, there's always a right or wrong, and the administration center would always say, I had the right idea. But that was never the case, because it was always a discussion. And also the most important things in that community had to be elaborated by a discussion, and it was an evolution of that. So there was never a situation where it was clear that this is the only way. And that I would recommend. And there's a nice saying, I'm not sure if I can translate it properly in English. Rome is in everything right, but also we have a mind and can think about things.
Okay.
Where's that quote from?
I thought it was also St. Augustine.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. So what you say is like the early parishes kind of discussed and argued and had their own culture, and then by becoming a state church, like it became more centralized.
Yes,
it was more like rules and laws, and then maybe not so much anymore a common understanding, or do these central rules and regulations then form again a culture of that's the way we do it?
Yes, but this brings me to my question, because the interesting thing is, and this is the same for rituals and culture, you might think that it's a stable thing, but both is constantly in change. It's just the time frame you took, because rituals have to be that stable that you can do that and do that and do that, and the frame stays the same, but of course they will change during the time. And it's the same with culture. You need the connection by the stable points, but of course it reacts on what is the reality and the needs of the time and changes that. So I think for me this is the interesting thing to think about these poles. What is the stable part and what is the changing part? And how does it make an organization really the culture seeable or feelable? So what should stay stable to have that culture, to be able to talk about culture?
Yeah, that's sort of a meta discussion actually, because I love asking those questions when doing transformation projects, for example. I like to ask, what do you not want to change? And even that, so that might refer, so the answer, the potential answer might refer or might answer your question, but it depends who you ask and when you ask. Because people, the longer time takes and the more new experience they make and the more insight they get into information that lay outside their horizon or reach or whatever for a short time, if they gain insight and are really able to digest those informations, they're really ready to question. Long believed in truths or things they thought that could not change. The only answers people need is, am I right? Am I doing the right thing? So it always comes down to that. People need direction of, is this good, is this bad? We are all caught in dichotomies, if you will. So people tend to need the answer. Am I good? Am I bad? Am I right? Am I wrong? And culture provides those directions, but what's right, what's wrong? What's good, what's bad changes. So the only, well, Panterei, the only thing that's stable and that stays is change itself.
So does an organization need a firm identity to be able to change, an understanding of what they are, not just a company where I go in the morning and earn my money, but does an organization itself, does it help the organization if you ask anybody in the organization and people will tell you a somewhat similar story. We are here because of that, we do things like this, why?
Yeah, they do. But this identity itself is subject to change because as organizations grow, they develop new rituals. So that's a perfect match now. And those rituals influence the culture and their identity as well. So if you take like startups from 20 years ago and all those major social networks we know today, they started out as startups being very agile, being very fluid, being very like innovative, creative, and now they're mainstream. So and they sure have a different identity. And even if Google says, well, don't be evil, we know that from interviews with Google employees, well, you may ask some of the 10,000 fired during the last weeks that the identity for sure has changed due to the sheer growth of the organization.
Yeah, and they are perceived by people as being evil by some people, and some people say they're not evil, so that the outer perception might differ from what they say they are. Now, in terms of sustainability, I mean, if I try to bring this back under the umbrella of sustainability, would be something that in my realm people would like to better to work in. People don't want, well, that I perceive, I meet lots of people who would like to do something that improves the status quo into something better, more sustainable. Yet we are working in product development in IT. How can we go about this? Do organizations need something like a sustainable consciousness or identity? Do we need rituals that go into a sustainable way? Could that help us at all? Or is sustainability and what we do in our daily work kind of not is it not possible to bring that together somehow?
I'd say that your rituals contribute in each case to your culture, and if you want to change something, start with that and look what are your repetitive structures.
Is that like fake it till you make it?
No, it's not that, but you can influence, of course, in good and in worse, what you do, and I guess we are convinced that we want to do that in a good way. But first starting with having an eye on that and to see not what is your best intentions, or what is the real behavior and how do the people react in these situations, and to see if you can introduce here things that could influence your repetitive doing.
Yeah, I think my point was that we need to question the underlying assumptions, the basic beliefs of modern economic growth, and that was faster, better, bigger, whatever, more.
Maybe so survive something now.
Yeah, but yeah, we now have the challenge to think growth in more dimensions than these. Like as I said, it's like a new Copernican turn. So growth, as we knew it, might be dead in the future because we are hitting hard the limits of what is possible. So sustainability itself is a growth, as we can see from the declining curves of company life expectancy. So if we manage to survive longer than those, I think it was 10 years or so in the recent years, then if we manage just to survive, which is true for maybe the planet, whole humanity, but organizations as well, we need to develop a culture that has more perspectives on growth than the traditional ones. And that's why I'm saying that we need a new culture and need to question those assumptions in order to be resilient and in order to be able to survive in the Barney world.
So you would say that a company like Lufthansa would benefit from thinking about not bringing so much kerosene, burn it up at the height of 12 kilometers. That's not a sustainable business case. So they would have a motive to think about different ways of surviving with their business.
Not only true for Lufthansa, but for all of us. So, and again, CO2 is just one measure of sustainability. So the question would rather be of Lufthansa, what's our contribution to the world?
I was working at Lufthansa, and 15 years ago or so, long time ago, I was asked whether I want to be on a managerial position. I should write down my top 10 points why I would like to be in a managerial positions, like a top 10 list. Why would that be a good idea? And around number 5 or number 6, I had a point which said Weltverbesserung. I want to become a manager because I like Weltverbesserung. As manager, I thought maybe I could help a bit better with that. And
let me guess, they rejected it.
Yeah, it kind of dropped off like a marble from a from a marble floor. It didn't. There was no impression whatsoever in that, in that.
I do have a thesis that will be different today. Now they would find you very interesting candidate.
Why is that? Why has that changed today? I mean, why is that? Just because sustainability is something, a term, or because they have a crisis, or because they don't have personnel? Are these all motivators for becoming a sustainable company?
I think because it's sort of a new paradigm and something that companies are not only rated by employees, customers, but also by the market and stock exchanges. So the value of the company is not only the financial or whatever economic values, but the values they communicate and are measured by, and their behavior are measured against their communications. So. And if you take a look at recent advertising campaigns, also by the big players in the market, in the mobility market, they always try to incorporate the one or the other sustainability feature in it, and that would be unthinkable just 5 or 10 years ago, maybe, before Greta, anyways.
So sustainability in companies is a thing?
It is.
Is it a thing at Andrena Objects?
Oh.
I could open the question to the auditorium if I ask if you would like to raise your hands. I mean, maybe I should ask more than one question, but one question would be for whom has, on the far, whatever, sustainable side, who of you would say sustainability is an issue I think about daily in my work? I see 1, 2, 3 out of 20 hands, something like that would correspond to 15% in our auditorium.
Yeah, but that's exactly but that's exactly the early adopters. But if you imagine the normal distribution, like the bell curve, you are the 15%, the early adopters. Congratulations.
At least you didn't say the lone nuts.
No.
That's gone. The lone nut phase is done after Greta has done her thing.
No.
The early adopters in companies. And who of you would like to have a job to which you go to tomorrow which would better the world? I mean, simple question. Probably lots of you would raise their hands. Yeah, that's it. So the thought comes before the action.
It always does, and it needs to come before the action. Usually it comes after the action if you have the feeling that something might have gone wrong. Then you start to think about it.
So how do we deal with my impatience? I mean, that's my problem, of course. But how can we do something? Something real, reduce carbon dioxide, or become more diverse.
Patiently, you must.
Thanks, Yoda.
So.
I thought you were Trekkie.
Flexible.
From my topic, I'd say the advantage of ritual is that you do things that become your, let's say, flesh and blood. So you can try to think about the easy first steps you could repetitively do that lead in this direction. And the more you do that, the more natural will it be and the more part of your normal life. So here, I guess, you could use the power of the rituals, to think about that.
There is this book, Tiny Habits, and it says start with a 2-minute tiny habit every day. Atomic, yeah, no, I think it's Tiny Habits, but anyways, 2 minutes every day.
And here, that's a very good explanation of the rituals. You have this abstract level, you have an intention, you have a value you want to realize, and now you have to find your fitting action.
I'm totally amazed. I have the left and the right side agreeing and proposing to me to ritualize small good steps. What could that be? Like a carbon-free Friday or a vegan Monday, or something that you ritualize in your way in your company, or
Any of those. The thing is not to think about what to do or what it could be, but actually do it. We only see results, we only see impact if we act and if we do things.
Okay, so I take home now. I have to be more patient and not and say
actionable.
Talking is good. Action might be better, but we need to start talking first before we come into action. And ritualize things to help.
Yes.
The things that we already do, ritualize, repeat them, and
yes, pick something, a tiny thing, and that will have this effect. You will not change the world overnight and not make the better world in 2 months, but that's something you can do. That's in your range.
Yeah, I would agree. We also, we need to challenge our beliefs.
Cool. I would like to open the discussion to the auditorium. I keep looking at Stefan because you have this. You are one of the founders of this Agile for Future movement with a couple of companies. So, and you raised your hand when I asked, do you daily think about sustainability in your daily work? Do you have a ritual at your company? Maybe we need a microphone.
Yeah. Perhaps. So we have a strange company structure. We have stacks, that's an acronym for stable container, and flocks, an acronym for floating container. In floating containers, people form around a topic. In stable containers, people are typically voted or some other mechanism. And we created a climate stack, and that's in a way a ritual, since a stack sends a delegate to the most important company meetings. So that way, climate has always a voice in these meetings.
Thanks for sharing.
That's great. And do you, I mean, that's not a far-fetching question, but do you also experience that kind of spreads out into your work with customers? I mean, for now, it's just something you do in your company, but your consulting company, does that influence the way you work with customers?
Yes, in very tiny ways. So, some years ago, we added a section in our offers that said we're working on becoming climate neutral, and we defined what we mean with climate neutral, and we guarantee certain things. And in most cases, we didn't get a response from our customers. They just accepted the offers or not. But in one case, one customer came to us and said, that's great. Are we allowed to copy the section to force all of our service providers to include a similar section in the offer? That was only one case, but that was great, where we had the feeling of having an impact.
Yeah, cool. So that's actually, I think that's an interesting example, because it shows that also consulting companies can, by changing their inner values or living up to some standards, can hope to influence also the partners they work with, or maybe some of the partners they work with.
Do we have other questions, comments, thoughts?
We have already talked about the differences between the Christian and agile culture, but maybe we could talk about the differences as well. It may maybe come to mind to compare the Agile Manifest to the New Testament, of course. And in my opinion, there are many differences. The New Testament is somehow written in stone for the last centuries. Maybe there were some information lost in translation, so they may changed. But the Agile Manifest is a subject of change at a regular basis, I think. And maybe, do you think it's a difference that could, yeah?
I'd say the difference, that would be another topic to reflect whether agility, let's say, adapts religious structures or talks in religious terms, like if you talk about evangelists or something, or but the huge difference is between a religion and our secular thing is that all religion relies to a transcendental reality, and this is the case here. So that is a completely different thing. But in a similar way, I thought about it, and potent and bold, similar way, not in the same way. We rely on values. And for instance, you have our Scrum values, and you have also in a religion some values that are fixed, and you have the 10 commandments and the 2 rules about love your next and love yourself as your next, and so on. So we have orientations and values, and this is same, I'd say, but the context is completely different. But yeah, it's difficult to say because also religion changes, and this is never fixed because you always need somebody who interprets that is written, and that is different in all centuries. So it depends on the concrete people, and I guess that is also the same for our environment. In a former contribution, somebody said something like, "I guess that is was meant by agility." And here I thought, okay, we are at this position where we need somebody who interprets and says, okay, that was our idea and we are now doing that, but we can remind this situation of the beginnings. So also here you need somebody who interprets concretely the content.
And there certainly have been wars about methodology and agility. I mean, if I think back about the Kanban to Scrum wars, or then the SAFe movement comes along with a fixed set of rules, which kind of, there was a bit of a laugh, you know, when you put out the Roman Empire.
Yes.
The church, then you have a very big framework with very perceived, very fixed ways of doing things. So, I mean, we tend to be quite religious in the way we treat the methodology with which we work.
And that was a fun thing I did, because I tried to say we have our agile rituals, and let's put on the left side liturgic rituals with their rules, and on the other side magic rituals. And all of them have certain rules. For instance, a magical ritual is something where you want to have an effect by doing something, but you don't know how this effect will happen. So whenever you do something and you expect your effect by somehow or somewhat, that tends to be a magical one. And if you do something on the other side and you think it is of a cosmic necessity to do that, because if you don't do that, spring never comes back, or there will be apocalyptic scenarios. For instance, if you say you leave out or you don't perform a retrospective, then that will be the end of the world. Then your rituals tend to be kind of religious or liturgic rituals, because they consider the ritual itself as something that is cosmic necessary in that way. So that could be a thing you could reflect on.
That's interesting, because you just now brought the image to my mind that rituals can help. Like if you have a 15-minute or 10-minute stand-up each day, that might be really good. Yet if you have retrospective that you ritually do because you attend, because you have to, in other words, it's not really a sprint or something, nobody really enjoys the stuff anymore, then maybe the ritual, how is there a solution to that? If your ritual really is awkward, you don't want to perform it, you have to do it, but it's kind of, is there from the perspective of rituals, is there a way out of it? I mean, there might be ways out of it other way, but...
I would answer in another direction. Talk with your colleagues and your teams about that, about the situation, and about that, what could happen, and then see what the discussion brings. So I guess there's no solution that fits to each and every one, each and every situation. But I guess you will trigger a discussion that could help avoiding the situation, and then maybe you find a solution.
When is the ritual good, and when is it kind of not good anymore? When is it good to stick to your ritual and just do it even if you're tired and you didn't have your third coffee and you go to the stand-up? When is it still good, and when does it turn sour?
I'd say from the basic structure I offered, if your ritual meets your intention by what you are doing. I could imagine that this answer is not satisfying you.
How do you measure that? Is there a way to measure that? I mean, should you then every quarter of the year ask people, do you still love the ritual, or you hate it, or you kind of go gradually, but you then agree that it has been good afterwards? When you said earlier on, rituals might help you.
Also
yeah, I'd also like to open it up to the audience. So, what rituals did you omit? Did you just kill? Is there anything from your practical work in your organizations?
Oh, good question. What is the most important meeting in Scrum?
And what is the most seemingly important thing you just recently killed? With what effect?
Who thinks retrospectives are more important than stand-ups? Retros are more important than stand-ups. Who thinks stand-ups are more important than retros? There's a majority for stand-ups are more important than retros. That's interesting. Who thinks either way both are very important? A stupid question. There's some are undecided. Interesting, but that many more people think the stand-up is more valuable than the retro.
yes, and that could be a good starting point, talking about why do you think that, and what experience did you make in that? Because for us, the really important thing is our rituals do not work by just doing it because it's somebody else does something, because it's a working session, even if it's a ritualized working session. But you have to think it from the center, and this is the experience that the rituals help. And then you could ask what helped you, and what aspect. When was your ritual good and helpful, and how could you make, or how can you increase this experience?
Yeah, I would like to underline this, because if you like your point of does the action meet the intention? Because if there is a tension or even a break between action and intention, or vice versa, then you have started reflecting. Like, for example, people are, especially with the traffic in Hamburg, more reflecting on, do I take the car to work, or any means of fossil fuel transportation, or do I walk, take my bike or car sharing or whatever? Yeah, because you just, maybe some years ago you did things without thinking about it because it was a ritual you performed every day. So, but now, if you start to think, well, is this still a good thing to do? Because the action is challenged by a new belief or a new attention, then just cancel it or change it.
We have comments here. Sandra said,
Oh, great.
I believe one important thing about rituals is that humans just love them. Think about the kids who want their bedtime story each night at the same time, the same way. So never start doing funny voices, because you have to do it the same time as last time, each time. Oh, so you have to do it each time once you start it. That's good. So it absolutely makes sense to introduce everyone to rituals in their daily work. We just have to be careful to still be open for change, even in the ritual. So
Yes.
how do you change a ritual then?
You can change rituals. For instance, if you inspect your daily Scrum, how do you open it? How do you close it? Are there things you could try out to invent here? For instance, a tiny ritual, or a part of your ritual. And of course, they have to be stable to be recognized as a ritual. But of course, each ritual changes. And this is no contradiction.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's because it's called ritual and not ritual. Pun on words.
So you get a question now, Anke.
Oh, cool.
Do you have any idea, Andreas Gar has asked that, do you have any idea how to inspire people to talk about the impact of VUCA going Bani, or what can be improved in this context?
Yeah, a good idea would be to show them the numbers, the facts. I mean, after all, it's just a gradual difference between VUCA and Bani, and there's no right or wrong. Well, the message they both have in common is, well, the world is complex and you cannot manage complexity, and there's no logic way of acting in order to handle or to face complexity. So I think the best way to do it is to start where you are and not look too far into the future, because that's always easy to do, because the future is far away as far as you can imagine. The harder thing is to do, well, where do we stand today, and what can we change tomorrow? Remember the tiny habits, and see how we can meet the VUCA or the Bani word. There is big consultant companies who come up with different acronyms to counter VUCA or Bani. Forget all about it. Try to understand where you are today and where you want to be tomorrow, and what the next best action is.
So small steps for keeping the big idea in mind.
Yeah, if you see your North Star, well, we all know, at least during our lifetimes, we will never reach a North Star, but we all see it, and it gives us a direction. We will never get there, but we all look at the North Star, and well, we know, well, this is where the North is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. I had one idea about reflections about rituals. Maybe reflection is kind of a really important part, since rituals can be really powerful over time, since we repetitively do them. And this is maybe kind of an answer, or could be an answer to your question, when is a ritual good or when is it not? I think we just have to come together and think about, actually reflect about rituals after some time, maybe regularly, so we see if they actually work. And if they work, then we can keep on or optimize them. If not, then we maybe get rid of them or take other rituals and optimize them. So,
and maybe that's also the answer to stand-up or retrospective. If you think the stand-up is the ritual and the retrospective would be the means to change it, or one means of changing it. Good one. Okay.
thank you.
I think we have I look into the chat, I don't see any more questions. So people abroad and in the internet, if you feel free to open your microphones and just say hello or so. We have a loudspeaker here and it should technically be able to hear you. If you like. If you don't like, that's fine as well. I think we will come to an end. And I would like to thank Anke Nehrenberg and Michael de Zan. It was really great having you here. And a remote wave to Gina. Thank you very much, audience, and thank you very much, participants in the internet. And remember, tomorrow we'll be online again at Chibo at that time, in the morning, not in the evening.
Well, the bachata is in the evening.
Yes.
Oh, that will be great fun.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Internet, thank you.